Hey everyone, and welcome to our second webinar in the How to Succeed at IELTS webinar series. That is how to prepare for IELTS reading. Don Oliver, one of our most popular IELTS experts, is back and here to walk you through the question types and tasks for IELTS reading, what exactly examiners are looking for, and when they're scoring a test. And he'll also be addressing some common misconceptions about the reading test. If you have any questions whatsoever about IELTS reading, please ask them in the Zoom comments or Q&A if you're watching via Zoom, or in the Facebook comments if you're tuning in there, and our team will pass them on to Don and myself. That's all from me. So without further ado, I'm happy to pass you over to Don. Welcome, Don.
Thanks very much, Sam. Thank you very much for those words of introduction. And as you said, we're going to look at reading today. And some people find the reading difficult. Other people find the reading relatively easy in IELTS compared to writing, for example. But wherever you are, there are some tips, some strategies that can help you improve your score in IELTS reading. We're going to look at different examples of IELTS reading. And as I said before, we're going to give you some practical advice about improving your score. The way that we score reading is basically to give you quite a wide variety of question types. And IELTS differs from some other English language tests in that the types of questions are quite varied. And this is not an accident. This is in order to test your English reading as well as we possibly can. And it means that when you do get a good score for IELTS reading, it means you can read English pretty well. There are some mistakes that people make when they do the reading test. Sometimes it's they misjudge the time. Sometimes it's they leave some questions unanswered. If they're doing a paper and pencil test, sometimes they don't write clearly or they make spelling mistakes. We'll talk about all of those things as we go along. So, reading. The IELTS reading is 40 questions and 1 hour. Now that's a lot of questions in a relatively short time. The other important thing about reading is that it's different if you're doing the academic version of the IELTS test compared to the general training version of the IELTS test. So the academic reading is more academic. There are 3 passages of about 900 words each in the academic. And that sort of reading is about 1 page of a serious English language news magazine or popular science magazine. If you're reading things like that, then you are reading good examples of an academic reading text. In fact, the people who design the academic reading read things like the Guardian newspaper, New Scientist magazine. They look at not very academic, but semi-academic texts, and that's how they produce the passages for academic reading. So when you see that sort of thing in a newspaper, in a magazine, read it, because this is very good practice for academic reading. The general training reading is about the same number of words, but instead of having 3 passages of 900 words, you might have about 6 different passages, texts, and only one of them will be a long one. The section 3 is 1 long text, like in academic, but in sections 1 and 2, you'll have shorter texts. And we're going to look at an example of one of those later on. It's a group of advertisements, but it might be a list of rules, or it might be some instructions, and probably something to do with your workplace. Okay, that is what the reading test looks like. But I'm going to ask you a very serious question now, because some people say, well, you know, I didn't get the score I want in reading. And I ask them, well, how often do you read English? And they say, oh, maybe once a week. No. In order to improve your reading, you've got to read. I suggest you do it every day. And the great advantage of that is it won't just help your reading, it will help your speaking, it will help your writing, it will help your listening. Do it systematically. Become an active reader. Ask yourself questions when you read. Think like the examiner. What question can I ask about this paragraph? What would be a good heading for this paragraph? That's what the examiner is doing when he or she is designing the reading test. Okay, how do we test reading? Well, I've sort of said already, one of the things that we do, we give you a lot of words, a lot of questions, and a fairly short time to do it. In other words, we're asking you how quickly you can get information when you read. So speed is important. Now, of course, being a speed reader is not something that's easy to do in a second or third language. But there are some strategies that can help you become a more efficient reader. We say here that there are about 2,500 words in a reading test. But you might not have to read every one of those words. Because if you can practice skimming, that is not reading every word, but reading every 2 or 3 sentences in a paragraph, concentrating on the first paragraph and the last paragraph, looking at the important words like the nouns and the verbs particularly, not reading to the end of a sentence necessarily, but looking at the main part of sentences, then this can help you improve your efficiency. And by the way, it's something you already know how to do. When you're reading in your first language, a newspaper, you don't read every single word on the front page, do you? Your eyes skim across and you think, that's interesting, that's boring. I'm going to read that. I won't read that. This is skimming, and you need to practice doing it in English as well. The other thing that you need to practice is scanning, and we're going to practice that today in this session. Scanning begins by you looking at the questions in the IELTS reading test. Looking at the questions and thinking, what is the key information that I'm trying to find? Is it a name? Is it a number? Is it a date? Is it a place? Then, when you know that that is what you're looking for, your eyes can quickly find that place, that number, that date, that name. That is scanning, and we'll practice that in a minute. And finally, you do need to practice reading for detail, but don't do that all the time. Reading for detail means you're checking to see, is it in or is it on? Is it the most or is it more? Is it now or is it in the past? These are details which are very important for some questions, but not for every question. And we'll practice that in a minute as well. Okay. As I said before, the IELTS test is a particularly good test of English because it has a range of question types. And here you can see 5 question types And there are subsections here as well. So it's more like about 8 different question types. Multiple choice, A, B, or C. We're going to look at a question like that. Identifying true, false, or not given. Some people hate that, but we're going to look at that as well. Matching. What is the heading that goes with this paragraph? Completion. Finish this sentence with a word or 2 words. And short answers. When did it happen? Who did that? You see that some of those questions have a little asterisk, a star after them. Multiple choice, star. Identifying, star. Sentence completion, star. Short answer, star. That's very important information. It means that the answers to your questions come in the same order as the questions come. It means, for example, if you're doing a true, false, and not given question, if you get the first answer, then you know the second answer comes after that in the passage. And the third answer comes after that in the passage. This is important information because it helps you find your way efficiently through a passage. Okay, let's look at, in a little bit more detail, the true, false, and not given type of question. Now, this is a short video that Sam himself, I believe, designed, and it's good. It's simple. Its subject is bananas, and who doesn't like bananas, right? Let's look at this, and it explains the difference between true, false, and not given. And very importantly, it tells you not to just rely on your assumptions. Don't just rely on your prior knowledge. Look at the passage and answer from the facts that are in the passage. Before we look at this video, I'll just mention one other thing. If you find that you're having difficulty getting the answer, you don't know if it's true, false, or not given, you're spending a lot of time on this. Well, that's probably because the answer is not given. Okay? If it's the more difficult one, it probably means that the answer is not there. There is no information about that. And the other tip I'll give you is, in a set of these true, false, and not given questions, it's unlikely that the first question will be not given, because we don't want you wasting too much time on that first question. Okay, let's listen now to this video about bananas. That was nice, wasn't it? That was very well done, Sam, by the way. That was a very simple example of looking at the information only in the passage and not assuming just because something is more expensive that it's necessarily better. Now here we're going to look at a more complex type of true, false, and not given question. And this one is much more similar to a real passage in an IELTS reading test. There are some difficult words here, but one tip that I want to give you is if there is a difficult word, relax. Because if there is a difficult word, it will be explained in that passage. It may not be explained directly, but you'll see here a word like Aboriginal Australians. Maybe you don't know Aboriginal, but you can see from the rest of this text that we're talking about migration 50,000 years ago. So of course, well, this means the original, the first Australians, the native Australians. And if you can relax about unknown words, and if you can practice reading without your dictionary sometimes, then you'll become more confident in your reading. Now, remember, I said scanning is to look at the questions first. So let's do that. The first question, is it true, false, or not given? Aboriginal Australians are descended from the inhabitants of Africa. What we have to do is decide what is the key word here. Where are the key words? Well, I think the key word there is Africa. If I find that word, then that will help me get the answer. And the other key word is descended from. Another word like ancestors or came from or originated from. And we see, of course, in the first paragraph that the ancestors of Aboriginal Australians were part of a migration from Africa. So, of course, the answer to this one is true. If we look at the second question, the ancestors of the Aborigines settled in Australia about 80,000 years ago, we can see there the key words are 80,000 and settled or arrived. Well, we can see in the second paragraph that it was 50,000 years ago. They arrived 50,000 years ago, so that one, of course, is false. And finally, the third question, Aboriginal Australians are the most genetically diverse race in the world. Well, here, what are the key words? The key words, of course, are genetically and diverse, but this other word, most, is a key word. Now, when you think about most, it's difficult to be the most. It's difficult to be the biggest. It's difficult to be the best, the smallest, the greatest. This can help you a little bit because it's unlikely to be true. And we look at the passage and we see that the word genetic diversity is there in the final paragraph. But the word before it is not greatest, it's greater, it's more, not most. So here, we know that there is genetic diversity here between Aboriginal people in Australia, and that it's greater genetic diversity than some other races, not all other races. Basically, we don't know if this is true or false. There really is no information to tell us exactly whether this is true or false. So this is an example of a more difficult passage, but we use the same strategy as with that simpler one about bananas. We don't rely on any of our previous knowledge, but we try and find the key words that will help us understand the meaning. So that's academic. General training, as I said before, is a little bit different. And let's look at some general training as well. Before we do, let me just remind you of what we were talking about. Look for synonyms, okay? Look for words that mean the same. And as I said before, settled in Australia, it might be arrived. Also look for words that are confusing, distractors, ideas that are close together, but will distract you, make you believe that they are in fact exactly the same when they're not. Genetic diversity does not equal cultural diverse. Okay, let's look at a general training now. And this is a very typical general training task. A group of advertisements or advertisements if you come from America. In this is a matching exercise. And the question is, for which advertisements here are the following statements true? And the statements are, 1, which 2 jobs are in restaurants? Which advertisement is for someone to look after children? And which job involves supervising other staff? Now, this is a very good example of where the IELTS test designer has not used these exact words in the passage. That means you have to find words that mean restaurant. You have to find words that mean children. You have to find words that mean supervising other staff. You won't find those exact words in the reading. And this is where you really need to extend your vocabulary, to learn new words all the time, because that will help you read more quickly and efficiently. Look at the first 2 advertisements here. The first one is for experienced waiting staff. Now, if you've read a lot, if you read English every day, then you know that waiting is working in a restaurant, being a waiter. But the word restaurant is not used here. We're talking about an eating house. We're talking about service. This, of course, is about a restaurant. So this is one of the jobs that answer that first question, the 2 jobs about restaurant. Look at the second one, experienced store manager. This one is about somebody who is managing staff. They have to conduct training. They have to hire and assign staff. The word supervising other staff is not used here, but this advertisement is the answer to that third question. Which job involves supervising other staff? Let's look at the next ad. Data entry or data entry. This is an office job. It's not in a restaurant. It's not managing other staff. And there's nothing about children. Forget about that one. What about the next one? Well, this again is a different sort of job. It's about helping older people learn how to use iPads, not children, not in a restaurant. Then we get to E. And here again, you can see words that mean restaurant, but do not say restaurant. Central Highlands Food. It's an organization in hospitality. They talk about catering. They do actually say restaurant in this one. They talk about being able to self-manage with minimal supervision. Now, this is a distractor because you might be looking for the word supervising and find this word supervision, but it's not the answer to that last question. This is managing yourself, not supervising other staff. So here is the second ad that answers that first question. The two jobs that are in restaurants are A and E. The job which involves supervising other staff is B. And the children, well, here is the answer. Now again, the word children is not used at all. If you read a lot of English, you'll know what a nanny is. A nanny is someone who is employed to look after children. And then you see 2-year-old and 4-year-old brothers. Well, of course, they are children. So this one is clearly the answer to the second question, the advertisement which is looking for someone to look after children. What we did was we were looking for the key words, but we were ready to find different words that described the same meaning. And as I said before, the more words you know, the easier your reading will become. Okay, we've looked at some good examples of academic and general training reading. And now let's finish with some advice. Read the questions first. This is what you should do. Skim. Don't read every word to begin with, but get a general idea of what the passage is about. If there's a picture, look at the picture. Look at the heading. Get a general idea of what the passage is about. And by reading the questions, you'll also get a general idea of what the passage is about. Then use your pencil, if it's a pencil and paper test, and underline those keywords. You can write all over the question booklet. And if you're doing the computer delivered test, as many people do nowadays, you can use the highlighting function there as well. Use the functions of the computer to underline keywords. Sometimes in an IELTS reading test, you are told to answer in no more than 1 word or no more than 2 words. Don't write 3 or 4 words in answer to those questions, because even if your answer is correct, it will be marked as wrong. And also, check your spelling. In the computer delivered test, you may be able to cut and paste your answer. But in the pencil and paper test, you may have to write a word. Check your spelling, and you should never make a spelling mistake, because the word you need is actually written in the passage. It will say, use a word from the passage, so you can check your spelling. But the other thing you need to do is make sure that you write clearly. I would print my answers to make it clear. Some people write freehand and their E looks like an L or their A looks like an O. If this is the case, it will be marked wrong, because the examiner will think, I can't say if this is the right answer or not. Then make sure that you relax. If you don't know a word, that's okay. It will be explained. It'll be explained in the text, or maybe even at the end of the text in a glossary. This word means that. If it's not explained, it's not an important word. So relax about that. And please practice reading without your dictionary. There are 40 questions and only 60 minutes. that means you only have a minute and a bit to find the answer to each question. So don't spend 5 minutes on a question. Leave it. You may find the answer as you're looking for the answer to another question. If you have only 2 minutes left and you have some blank spaces, fill them up. True, 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 true. A. One of those may be correct. You don't lose points for it. There are no penalties for wrong answers. So guess if you have to. All right. To sum up, you need to read in order to improve your reading. Read actively. Think about questions you could be asked when you read. Make a note of new words and revise them. Sometimes don't make a note of new words. Practice reading without a dictionary. Practice skimming. Practice scanning. Read a variety of texts. Not just what you're studying at university, but read popular magazines. Read English language newspapers. If you're living in a country that has an English language newspaper with local news in it, that's a good place to start. It'll be interesting for you to read that. Set a target for your preparation. I'm going to read a page of this newspaper every day. I'm going to make some notes about what I read every day. I'm going to set myself a target of 5 new words every day, and I'm going to use them to revise. I'm going to look at a subject on the internet that I'm interested in and read about that. You're going to decide if you're going to do the academic or the general training. And sometimes you have no choice, but sometimes you do. If, for example, you're doing a test for immigration, you can do either academic or general training. And some people may find the academic easier than the general training. So think about that. You know how you'll be scored if you look at our website, and it will tell you that a raw score of about 30 correct answers will give you a band 7. You need more than that for a band 8 or 9. You need fewer than that for a band 6. Go to our website and check that. And remember that you need to spell your answers correctly, otherwise they won't be marked as correct. And that means you should review your answers before the end of the test. Check for little spelling mistakes. Check that you have put the right answer in the right place. IELTS preparation is great. It helps you understand the types of questions you're going to be asked, but you need to do a bit more than that. It's not just test taking skills, it's actual proficiency and knowledge of written English. Okay, it's difficult to get a band 7 or 8 or 9 in IELTS, and that's fine, because a 7 or better means you're a very good speaker. You're a very good user of English. And everybody knows in the world that a band 7 or better in IELTS shows that you are capable of using the language, but it doesn't happen immediately. Be realistic. It takes some time. Take a long-term approach. And anything that you learn in English will help you in IELTS. It might be the words of a song. It might be something that you saw on YouTube. It might be a conversation you had in the supermarket with somebody. All of this is useful when you come to an IELTS test. So push yourself to use English every day, whether you're at the bus stop or the supermarket or on the internet. Check out a bit of English every time. The sort of help that we can give you is numerous. We have a website, IELTS.idp.com, that has preparation materials. We have a Facebook page where questions are asked and answered in some detail. Instagram as well. TikTok, all those things that we love to use. There are practical tips by IELTS experts on our website and some very useful YouTube videos. We saw one today already. So there are lots of ways that you can improve your IELTS score, and I hope that I've given you some good ideas today to do just that. Our next session will be on the 4th of November at 5 o'clock Australian time, and it's all about speaking. All right, so that is about it from me, Sam, and I'm very happy to answer any questions that might have been asked while I was blabbering away.
I wouldn't call it blathering, I'd call it an excellent webinar.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Don, for the shout out. That True, False, and Not Given video was a fun collaboration between myself, our digital content producer, and one of our experts who's located in Melbourne. If anyone wants to watch it again or any really similar content, like animated IELTS study content, it's available on our YouTube channel, IELTS by IDP on YouTube. Just head there, it's a pretty good channel. But yeah, now that we've learned everything about reading, I'm happy to kick off with the questions if you are, Don. Question 1. Are there any magazines in particular that you would recommend reading to improve your English?
Yeah, the first thing is work out where you are in terms of your ability. So there's no point in reading rather complex English if you are around about the band 4 or 5 level. If you're at that lower level, then check out simplified English to begin with. And there's plenty of that. You can find it on the internet, the BBC, the ABC, Voice of America, the CBC from Canada, lots of those things. Look for English for second language learners, stories, simple news articles. If you are getting up toward the 6 and 7 mark, then I would recommend you look at some serious newspapers. And one of the best newspapers in the world is The Guardian. And that has I don't get paid by them, by the way, but a lot of people and a lot of examiners read The Guardian. And there's an English, a UK version, there's an American version, there's an Australian version. And the sort of text that you see there is pretty similar in difficulty to what you will find in an academic reading test. I mentioned some others, New Scientist magazine, you can find that online, Time magazine, Newsweek, other magazines online. There's a very, very good resource called The Conversation. Go to The Conversation on your computer, and you will find there that this is an online resource where academics express in simplified terms information about their research. It's for the general public, and it's very similar in difficulty to what you will find in an academic reading test. And finally, if you're in a place like Australia, or if in a place where you find lots of English in society, in the culture, you'll find it in your letterbox. Don't just throw it away. Pizza delivery, specials, house window cleaning service, supermarket specials. This is perfect general training reading. So read it. Okay, that's my advice, Sam.
That was in depth. I think you covered everything I could possibly think of.
Probably missed something.
I don't know. It's why you're the expert, I think. I think that was all the bases.
Okay.
Question 2, what sources of information would you most recommend using to study for IELTS general training?
Generally speaking, not just reading, then general training, as I said, has a focus on work. And very often in the writing, you might have to write a letter about something to do with your work. In the reading, you may have to read some instructions or rules that are related to workplace. So think about that, but also with the general training, also realize that it's exactly the same as the academic in two important respects. The listening is exactly the same. So any advice about general training listening is exactly the same as for academic, and that is listen to lots of different English accents, Australian, New Zealand, American, on different subjects, everyday conversation or more academic subjects. With the speaking, the same advice for academic as for general training. Think about what you like, what you do, what you wear, what you eat in the first part of the speaking, and think about bigger issues like economics or the environment or education for the third part of the speaking. And those topics too, you'll be writing about in your academic and general training task 2 as well. So that's my advice about general training, and it equally applies to some parts of the academic.
Excellent. I think that was very general training advice. So amazing work. Question 3. This is a kind of interesting question. I am occasionally confused by true, false, or not given. Sometimes I feel there is a double meaning. I know the rules of this section, but can sometimes kind of be confused by information that appears unclear or that can contradict itself. Do you have any advice for dealing with this?
Yes. These tests are designed not to be contradictory. And they are tested with real test takers. And if there is some confusion, they won't be used, or they will be made clearer. So the contradictions should not be there. And if there are ever any contradictions, then appearing contradictions, it's probably down to your reading skill. So be confident that the reading has actually been trialed and there should be no confusion. Basically, is this true? Then the passage will say it is true. It will say that these bananas are more expensive, or these bananas are a better quality. But remember, they will be saying this in terms that are different to the question. So the question might be, is this fish found far from the shore? The passage will say this fish is found in deep water. You have to understand that these two things are synonymous. They mean the same. And in order to really understand that, you need to know more and more words and think in terms of synonyms. You can become an active reader and ask yourself, how can I express this in a different way? Because that is exactly what the examiner is doing. The person who writes the reading test is doing exactly that. How can I express this meaning in a slightly different way? False, it's the opposite of what the question says, and not given, no information. As I said before, if you're finding it hard to decide if it's true or false, it's probably not given. Okay.
Okay, that's really good advice, Don. Thank you. I think you covered everything again. Question 4, is there any negative marking in IELTS reading?
No, you don't lose marks. If you have 25 correct answers, and 15 incorrect answers, your score is 25. So don't worry about that. And that's why I suggested that you guess. If you've got 5 questions unanswered and 1 minute left, A. Guess, because 1 or 2 of those might be correct. And that could lift you from your 6.5 just up to your 7.
Excellent. Thank you, Don. Question 5 is kind of almost a philosophical one. Why is it that we are tested on our understanding of text and not our ability to read something out loud like we do in speaking or to someone?
Well, anyone can read out loud and not understand a word. I can read things in French or Japanese and not really understand what I'm saying. So the speaking test does test your ability to pronounce English words correctly, to produce spoken English. And really, we don't need any of that in the reading test. The reading test is purely your reading comprehension.
Excellent. Good answer. Thank you. Next question. Do we have a few minutes before the test begins to read through the paper like in a university exam?
No, you begin at when the clock is at 0 and you are told you can open your booklet, or in terms of the computer delivered test, it will appear. And after 60 minutes, close your booklet. So you have to manage your own time. You have to give yourself enough time to skim quickly to get the general gist of what the passage is about. Give yourself enough time to look at a group of questions and figure out the key words. Give yourself enough time to answer the 13 or 14 questions in each of the 3 passages, and try not to go over 20 minutes for each of those passages, because you need 20 minutes for each one of them. And hopefully give yourself a little bit of time at the end just to check that you haven't made some silly spelling mistakes or things like that.
Excellent. Perfect answer on time management, I think. I'll wait for you to finish your sip and ask you the next question.
Sorry, it's so unprofessional, really.
No, it's great. You've got to stay hydrated to answer all of these questions.
Well, that's so true.
Next question. Which part of the reading test do you believe candidates find the most difficult? And do you have any advice on how to tackle that section?
Well, I suppose this question is really about what type of question is the most difficult, because some people may find a particular topic easier than another. Some people might find the general training passages simpler than the academic ones. But when we come to question types, a lot of people, and an earlier questioner asked us about true, false, and not given. That is difficult, challenging for some people. But I think one of the most challenging is the matching one, where you have to find the correct heading or the most suitable heading for a paragraph. That causes a lot of difficulty for some people. And again, this is something you can practice. It might be a matter of seeing how often a particular word or synonym for an idea is repeated in this passage, and see if it is contained in one of the headings. It might be using a strategy like starting with the shortest paragraph first, get that out of the way. It might be being willing to change your headings when you realize that, in fact, this one is more suitable than the one you thought earlier on. And as I said before, practice becoming the examiner. What heading will I give to this paragraph? Now, if you can practice doing that as you read, then maybe you can, well, one day you might actually become an IELTS examiner, but it will give you an insight, Sam, into the mind of the person who is setting the test.
Interesting. I've always wondered if I could be an IELTS examiner. I think my sister could. She teaches in Japan. I think she'd
Oh,
make a good
really?
IELTS examiner. I don't know if I would though, but I think maybe one day we'll see.
Who knows?
Yeah.
And if you want to, come to me
Good advice.
and I'll give you some advice.
Thank you. You're good at that so far. Next question. I think I've heard you answer this one at least maybe 5 times ever. Does it make a difference to the marking examiner if I use words that are different in certain countries, such as color or color with a U, basically British versus American spelling?
Yes. No, it doesn't make any difference. It's the International English Language Testing System. And as I've said before, in a place like Australia, you will find native speakers of English who sometimes mix American spellings with British spelling. Sometimes they will say realize with a Z. Sometimes they will say color with a U or without a U. It doesn't really matter. But don't write color with a K.
That is a mistake. Big mistake. Next question. I think I've heard you answer this one a couple of times as well. I achieved 8.0 in my IELTS reading, but how would you say I could improve it to 9.0?
Well, 8 is pretty darn good. That means you only made about 3 mistakes, 3 or 4 mistakes. I say 3 or 4 because it does change from test to test, but the difficulty is the same. Well, it could be that you have a particular type of question which causes difficulty. It could be that you made a silly spelling mistake somewhere. It could be that you answered with 2 words when it said only answer with 1 word. And my advice is this: go to our website and look at one of our services called Reading Assist. And there we will give you a practice test and you will answer it. And we will look at your mark sheet and we'll tell you what sort of question you might be having difficulty with, and if you are actually making any of those small errors that I suggested. Okay, Reading Assist.
Yeah, I can attest. Reading Assist is a really good system. Great for feedback. I believe this is the last question on my list. This is the last question for the night. I find the multiple choice question section of academic reading the most difficult. Do you have any advice on how I could handle the multiple choice section?
Yes. Multiple choice, is it A, B, or C? Look, to be honest, I don't really have any specific advice for that. It's one of those questions probably where you need to read for detail. And once you have looked at the proposition, the statement, the cause of this was, the cause of such and such was A, this thing, B, this thing, or C, that thing. You're looking for keywords again, as we did before with the true, false, and not given. We're looking for cause and the thing that was caused. When you find that in the passage, you know that you're thereabouts for the right answer. Then it's just a matter of reading for detail. Was it caused by that? Or was it perhaps caused by that? Or wasn't it caused by that, etc.? Looking at that in detail and then matching the multiple choice answer that is most suitable. Not a very good answer, Sam, but I really can't think of any. What you could do is you could Google that. Say, okay, I need some advice with multiple choice questions. And I'm sure some person much smarter than I has written down some very good advice. So try that.
I think you're one of the smartest around, Don. I think that was still a pretty good answer about multiple choice.
Well, I try.
Well, thank you, Bab. As I said, that was the last question for tonight. Again, thank you, Don, so much for joining us, as always, to share your knowledge. It's always an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Sam. Lovely talking to you too, and everybody.
thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank